Welcome to the Superhero Bibliophiles podcast. This is a companion show to the Superhero Cinephiles podcast, except here we talk about comic books, graphic novels, all that fun stuff. And today I am joined by a returning guest, and that is Gordon Dymowski. Gordon, how you doing today?
Oh, pretty good, pretty good. How are you?
I'm doing good. This is actually, we're recording on August 12th, and it is actually my 42nd birthday today.
Oh, congratulations.
And
Happy birthday.
thank you. Thank you. Yeah, my daughter decided she was going to celebrate by giving me a hard time getting ready for preschool this morning. So keeping me in check.
Yeah.
But anyway, so before we get started, why don't you remind people a little bit about who you are, what you do, all that fun stuff.
Okay. Well, I am a writer and author. I write both fiction and nonfiction. Most recently, I had an essay published in a volume by ATB Publishing called "Outside and Can Live with It," and it's one writer does one episode of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, and it's a more creative essay than it is kind of a here's the plot, here's an analysis. So I was recently published in that volume, and I wrote about the two-parter, The McKee, which not only launches the whole Dominion War, but it also, it's kind of like a prequel to Star Trek Voyager, and it kind of starts. It's where DS9 really goes into high gear. I've also had fiction published by a variety of publishers, which you can find me on Amazon. You'll find at least one thing that I've read. I'm also, when I'm not writing fiction, I'm also doing a lot of marketing and content work, copywriting and content work. And I also do some work for in tenants' rights. And in fact, right now I'm taking a course in tenant organizing put on by the Tenant Union Federation. So I'm kind of a jack of all trades, as it were.
Okay, very cool. Yeah, and very important stuff, especially these days. Tenant rights is increasingly becoming a very fraught subject. So very important. We're having good people like you fighting for that. So I'm very glad to hear that.
Mhm.
Now, what kind of stuff have you been interested in lately? What's kind of been grabbing your attention these days?
Let's see. Well, I've been on the comic side. I've been really digging a lot of the work of uh, DC's Absolute line, including
Hmm.
and my personal favorite is for some reason is Absolute Green Lantern. I mean, it's abstract. It's not a space opera-y, but it's more intellectual. But there's a kind of the sci-fi underpinnings are there, and it's just a complete. It's like a complete 180 of Green Lantern. And on the mainstream Justice League, a friend of mine recommended Justice League Unlimited, which I am really liking. That book is just so. I mean, it's creative, it's fun. It's like DC realized that it had more fans than just the 40-year-old fanboys who grew up reading it in the 80s.
Yeah. So that's the Mark Waid book, right?
Right.
Yeah, yeah, I've been meaning to check that out. I mean, I'm a huge fan of Wade, so like anything he does, I make it a point to check out at some point, eventually.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I have and the absolute stuff. I've it dipped my toes in and there. I've read like I think the first arcs of Superman and also the first arc of Batman. I read the first issue of Wonder Woman, but I haven't picked up anything beyond that. But I really liked what I've read. I've been meaning to check out the other ones. So Flash, Green Lantern, Martian Manhunter. Those are all on my list to check out eventually. But yeah, it's been a really fun exercise, and it's kind of funny because this what they're doing now with the Absolute line is I think they could have seen similar success with the New 52 stuff if they didn't tout it as a reboot of the whole thing. They just did it just kind of like its own thing, like they're doing with the Absolute books, because some of that stuff was actually pretty good in isolation. And so it is good to see that they've kind of learned their lesson, and now they're trying these new, fresh, interesting takes with these characters. And in some cases, yeah, it's a complete 180 of what you've expected. So in the case of Batman, he's not a child of privilege anymore. This time he grew up, as a working class guy, and so that's a different dynamic it adds to him. In Superman, he came here, but he wasn't a little kid when he came here. Now he was an adult, and so he's more closely tied to Krypton than ever before. So it's really interesting to see these different kinds of ideas they're playing with, and I'm looking forward to checking out the rest of the line. It's fun to see when they get to experiment in these different ways without having to worry
Hmm.
about the continuity side of things.
Right. Yeah, I mean it's good to have a line of books, kind of like Marvel's Ultimates, where you could. It's not a necessarily a new reader friendly one, but it's simple enough where you kind of go, yeah, they're engaging on their own. They're not tied into a larger continuity. It's like here's the premise. It's a great world to kind of dip your toes in.
Yeah, and the new Marvel's new Ultimate line too, that they're doing really interesting stuff with that as well too. Like it's much more well thought out than the original Ultimate line was, which at the time I loved, but in retrospect you look back and you're like, oh, this is very kind of edgelordy, but with the exception of like Ultimate Spider-Man, um but now with this one they've got, Jonathan Hickman designed this whole new scenario for them to play in, um and so it's been real interesting, especially, the I don't know if you've checked out any of the new Ultimate books, but the Ultimates is great. It's just very like pure anti-authoritarianism, and then they've got Ultimate X-Men by Peach Momoko, which is a very unique book because it's Peach Momoko's, manga style X-Men basically, which is completely different from anything
Hmm.
I've ever seen from the X-Men. And it's an interesting read. So it's real fun to take a look at these different kind of ideas that are being played with. For my part,
Hmm.
I've been dipping into, different comics and stuff here and there, but the thing that really kind of got my interest lately was Fantastic Four First Steps. I saw
Hmm.
Superman in the theater on opening night. I didn't get to see Fantastic Four opening night, but I got to see it like about a week or so later, and I don't know if you saw it, but I loved it. And I'm not a big FF guy, um but I don't know. It's just like that movie. It just kind of like ticked all the right boxes that when I think of the FF, that it's basically what I think of. And that was pure what I saw on screen. And I don't know if you've
Yeah,
had a
I
chance to
haven't.
see it yet, but I really
Mhm.
liked it.
Yeah, I haven't seen either film yet. I mean, I've heard great things about both, and I'm looking forward to seeing them. But I think too, it's nice to see that they're also having a unique cultural moment where a lot of the talk is about how they're, without, yeah, I don't think I'm spoiling because I haven't seen either, but the ideas of kindness and family and kind of heroes as being somewhat noble, and how
Hmm.
people are actually a lot of people are actually complaining that like uh, you know, that uh, you know, is kindness the new punk rock and all that? And it's like, to me, I think it's interesting that Superman is being criticized for being too wokety woke woke woke. It's like no, these are. I'm glad we're having that conversation again because I think we need to have it right now, especially in the
Hmm.
States,
No,
with
absolutely.
everything else that's going on.
Yeah, the funny thing about when they're saying, "Oh, is kindness the new punk rock?" I'm like, kindness was kind of always punk rock. It was always about, it was always more about this being. It was always an inclusive group, unless you were a Nazi. In that case, Nazi punks fuck off. But
Right.
not like all the punks I knew when I was in high school. They were always like the nicest, most welcoming people you could ever meet. So it's kind of funny when like, is kindness? I'm like, do you guys know anything about this stuff? Like, it's always been this way.
Hmm.
Um,
Well,
but
yeah, and
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, I was about to say, yeah. I mean, I always gravitated towards the punk side of music anyway, because I think there is, punk for me was always about, you know, humanity and caring. It may
Hmm.
have been really loud guitars and screamed vocals, but that's what I think punk was about, being a decent human being.
Right, exactly. Yeah, absolutely. Um, and yeah, the both those movies, I feel like. we are really, yeah, I think you said it right. Like in this current cultural moment, like there is this hunger for um decency in our type of media. And it's not like it wasn't there in other superhero movies, but after especially in the Superman case, after just like the relentless focus on the grim and gritty type stuff, which you and I have talked about before when we talked about when they announced this DC slate. It is nice to see this other type of take on it. And I mean, I'm biased towards Superman because he's one of my favorite characters, whereas again, I'm never really been a very big FF fan. But even still, like when I try and think of both of these movies back to back, I'm trying to think of which one I like more. Like if I was going to have to put them up against each other, and I can't decide right now because it's just is my
Right.
instinct is to go with Superman, but Fantastic Four was just so good. I mean, it was just so good. Like the visuals of it, the using the retrofuturism style 1960s,
Hmm.
the family dynamics, like all of it was just incredibly well done. And my hat's off to Marvel for
Hmm.
finally getting it right with the Fantastic Four.
Hmm.
Um, but anyway, today we are talking about a comic book, and we are continuing from a discussion we had last time. Last time we had you on to talk comics, we talked about the first volume of Planetary, All Over the World and Other Stories. This time we are talking about the second book in the series, which is titled The Fourth Man. Um, so before we dive too much into the book, why don't you give a little bit of background about I know we've talked about this before, but just, kind of a refresher, your background history with Planetary.
Well, Planetary, I had discovered in the early 2000s. I was living in St. Louis, and I think my first issue was I think it was number 5 or number 7. It was the one with the pastiche of the Doc Savage covers. So I'm not sure which number it was, but what drew me was that even though it was a done in one story in the middle of an arc, there's just something so perfect about Ellis's writing and John Cassaday's art. And so I picked up every issue every month, and I really grew to like the book because it was really about uncovering the secret, hidden secrets in this world where there's a sense of wonder that had died out. And when you're talking about the Ultimates in the early 2000s, I mean, it's like um, it had that kind of. I think the thing that Mark Millar was always trying for, but always failed to get because he was too much of an edgelord and too cynical. Ellis kind of hit with, this is a book that had a sense of wonder on with it. It was part conspiracy, but every issue touched on some aspect of not just comics, but like pulp, movies, popular culture, etc. I mean, this is one of those books that I immediately fell in love with because the writing is just so damn good, and it has some really unique commentary. It uses, I think, some of these aspects of comic and popular culture to drive some really interesting insights. And it also tells an overall story about Elijah Snow, who is this is a guy who's wondering where he comes from. And in this volume he starts to figure it out. And I think that's why not only do I really enjoy this, not just because it's a good story, but it feels like the best streaming series put to paper 20 years before its time.
Yeah, that's all well said, and I agree with a lot of that. I discovered this a little after the first few books were published, and it was recommended by a friend of mine, another former guest, Logan Trent, suggested this stuff to me, and Logan was kind of like my Sherpa throughout most of these, um, getting outside of like the typical Marvel DC circles. He was always kind of the guy. It's like, hey, you should check out this. You should check out this, and he was a huge Warren Ellis fan at the time, and so Planetary was one of those books that he passed on to me to check out, and at the time, like I didn't have the kind of background in comics and pulp fiction that I do now. So a lot of the stuff that was in there just kind of flew over my head. When I reread it a few years ago, I was really kind of picking up on more of that stuff. And and just like how it really is, Ellis kind of having a conversation with the kind of pop culture that influence most of superhero comics. And Ellis is one of those interesting writers. His personal issues aside, he's obviously got a whole lot of things that have come out to light in terms of you know uh sexual stalking type behavior and that kind of stuff, which obviously fuck that guy. But in terms of just focusing just on the writing here, he's an interesting guy because I feel like sometimes he does veer a little bit too much into the him and Garth Ennis are very similar in that they've got these very kind of like edge lordy veneers to them, but they do have like some deeper messages they're trying to convey, as opposed to Mark Miller, who's basically just pure edge lord stuff all the time. But
Hmm.
Ennis and Ellis, similar names as well. They also, when you peel back the layers of their of the edgelord stuff, you really see there's some deeper kind of stuff. Like, people often talk about Ennis, for example, as being a very kind of cynical writer. And when you read some of his stuff, you're like, actually, no, there's actually a lot of hopeful stuff buried underneath the cynicism. And it comes through the more times you read it. And Ellis too, like
Hmm.
I think some of his best work is when he was restrained a lot of times by editorial and by like the limits of the kind of books he was working on. So, for example, like one of I think the best books he's ever done was his Hellstorm run in the early '90s, or also his when he did a run on Excalibur as well. And he was held back by the constraints of editorial at that time. This I don't think he was held back, but even still, it's very unique because usually when Ellis is let off the leash, he kind of just runs wild and he kind of lets his edgelord flag fly a little bit more. And he doesn't do that so much with Planetary. Like I think he still manages to restrain himself on some level compared to like some of his other stuff with like the Authority. And I think it's because you get a sense that he's very interested in kind of digging into these concepts, I think, more than he is with some of his other work.
Yeah, and I think I agree, and I think he also has a respect for the material and the audience. Whereas when you read something like Millar, you can tell he's just like, yeah, I really don't want to write this crap, but it's what'll sell, so I'm just going to write it, take the check, and run. Whereas with Ellis and Ennis, they they kind of you can tell that they care about the material enough that they want to do a good job. And I think in the case of Planetary, I know Ellis. He had always said this was not a series about superheroes. It's about archaeologists. Except instead of going to like Egypt and buried pyramids, they're discovering spaceships and in this volume a town where dissidents were brought in and experimented on, or a place where you wanted to avoid becoming fuel for a cosmic engine, so you had a drink, you put up your photo, and you tied yourself to an underground atomic bomb. I mean, it's this real sense of it's like there's a sense of it may sound ironic, but I think there's a real sense of wonder to Planetary that I think Ellis really taps into that I don't necessarily know if he taps into with his other work.
No, absolutely. And I feel like the biggest failing with this series, the part where it really kind of misses the mark, is the fact that this is supposed to be set in the Wildstorm universe, and there are a few like hints of that here and there where you get a few little trappings, right? There's mention of like Jenny Sparks and things like that. But for the most part, when I read this, I'm just like, this feels like it's set in its own universe, and I really wish Ennis hadn't had that conceit of, oh, it's set in the Wildstorm universe. I'm like, because it's really not. Like a lot of the stuff that's in here, if you know anything about like Wildstorm continuity, like this stuff doesn't fit together at all.
Well, I think maybe at one point, maybe Wildstorm editorial was like, yeah, don't worry about the tie-ins, Warren, just go with it. And I
Hmm.
think that's to the series' strength, where if you take out the mentions of other, maybe not the Jenny Sparks mentions, because that's kind of important to the other overall mythology, because she and Elijah Snow are century babies. But I think if you took out assorted ones, it still works as a solid piece, and it
Hmm.
would be. And I think the fact that's also one of the nice things is that it only ran for like 27 issues. that it's a nice, well, self-contained story that's, um, you know, and it's in 4 volumes, so it's easy to get through. Um, but I think because it is so self-contained and there's such a deep history to this, it's something that I think Alan Moore tried to do with the Awesome Universe because they had Supreme and they took some of the characters that Image didn't want or whatever, and he tried to bring it all together with a series called Judgment Day, which I think this is a much better version of that story because it's not tied into a trial. It's just this whole thing. It's this whole idea of here's a mystery, and in these issues we're going to tell that story. And I think in volume 2, the whole arc is who is Elijah Snow, and by the end we not only know who he is, but he basically makes it clear that okay, somebody did this to me and I'm going to get back at them. And he makes it clear that he's back.
Yeah, yeah. The comparison to Alan Moore's awesome work is a very good one, I think. And yeah, and one of the failings with the awesome stuff is because Alan Moore didn't have the kind of control that he necessarily needed to have over that because you still had like Rob Liefeld was still in control, and there was this idea of setting up this universe here so that other people could come in and play. Whereas, and then obviously the whole thing just kind of fizzled out. Although, side note for anybody, uh, there are apparently there's a because Alan Moore's scripts for the rest of his Youngblood series ended up on the internet, and some fans actually took it upon themselves to complete those issues and so write and draw those issues. So if you dig around on the interwebs, you could probably find, if you're interested in checking out the awesome stuff that Alan Moore did, that stuff is available out there somewhere in the ether. Obviously through questionable means because this stuff is out of print pretty much everywhere, but there are ways to get your hands on it. But I think Alan Moore is a nice place to kind of direct this conversation because I feel like Volume 2 was really where I kind of latched onto Planetary when I first read it, because this is the stuff that I was more familiar with, right? Volume 1 is much more steeped in kind of like the pulp influences, and Volume 2 feels like it leans a little bit more into the comic influences and the superhero comic influences. So this is the stuff where when I was reading it, I'm like, oh, now I get what he's doing here. Now I can see where this is going. Whereas with Volume 1, at the time when I read it, I didn't have that pulp background to really kind of understand what he was doing. So let's kind of dive into it. And I think my favorite issue here is the one that kicks off this collection, which is issue 7, and it's titled "To Be in England in the Summertime," and it's basically kind of half love letter, half satire of the British invasion of the mid to late 80s and the launch of Vertigo. And it starts with the death of this character who is what was I completely breaking his Jack Carter. He's basically John Constantine of this universe. And so you see like it opens up with his death and they're going to his funeral, and you see like all the characters from like the Vertigo comics there at his funeral. So you've got like Swamp Thing, you've got Etrigan, you've got the Endless, you have Morpheus and Death actually sitting on a park bench nearby. The Metal Men are there, which I think they made a mistake there and they were supposed to put in the Doom Patrol because I don't remember the Metal Men ever having a Vertigo run there.
It's confusing because there's a gold robot, so you would assume okay that's Robot Man, but there are 2 other metal robots. You're thinking, but I know there's the girl with the upside down head, so I think she's supposed to be Dorothy from the Doom Patrol. I mean,
Animal Man is there too.
Yeah, I mean it's great too because it kind of makes the point that that at one point they're talking about how England was just so dour in the 1980s, where she thought you had to choose. She think you had to choose between voting or eating. And I remember reading at the time there's actually a clause that she wanted to push through in the British government that would not only make homosexuality illegal, it would delete it as a concept. So you couldn't even. So that it's like, oh, we don't believe in LGBTQ. They don't exist. But yeah, and I do think it I like how it takes it makes some serious points about not just what brought the British invasion, but that, and towards the end, there's like a masked Superman slash Captain Marvel type character who talks about, hey, um, I didn't want to be like this kind of heroin addicted, weird guy, what, and who finds out that he wasn't created by a scientist, but by cloning Hitler's sex dwarves and all that.
Hmm.
Like, there's this idea of like, yeah, you didn't necessarily have to. I think at the end of this rant, he even says, if you're going to, if you didn't respect me, why not just leave me alone or things
Hmm.
like that.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite moments here, and I think this is obviously kind of a send up of Moore's work on Miracle Man or Marvel Man, depending on when you read it. This is actually a great speech here, so I just want to read it through it real quick here because it's so
Hmm.
funny and it is so on point with kind of like the stuff Moore was famous for back in the day, which Moore himself came to acknowledge. I feel like his work on Supreme was kind of a way of him apologizing for what he did in the 80s in a lot of ways. Um, but he says here, "You had to die. You were the symbol of everything that had been done to me, you scum. I should have been noble, clean, single. I didn't want to wake up in Soho with 12 volumed up Thai rent boys and terrible stains on my tights. You didn't have to take the damn photographs. I didn't want to find out that instead of getting my powers from a transcendent scientist mentor, I was grown from the DNA of Aryan super athletes and Hitler's personal sex midgets. I didn't even know Hitler had personal sex midgets. I liked my life. There was nothing wrong with me. I wasn't hip. I wasn't trendy. I wasn't edgy. And you know what? That was okay. I didn't need the split personalities, the nervous breakdown, the shift in sexual orientation, my life being a lie. If you didn't want me, you should have just bloody ignored me." And then Jack Carter shoots him in the back after that.
Hmm.
And yeah, it's a great metacom, especially because you know what's kind of funny here is that I was thinking about this last night because I've read this issue, several times, but last night when I was reading it, I was really kind of thinking about it. And the kind of joke here is that it's John Constantine and then he takes off, he's bald now, but he takes off his trench coat and underneath he's basically Spider Jerusalem, Warren Ellis's character,
Hmm.
lead character from Transmetropolitan. Um but when I was thinking about it, I was actually thinking about something different. And I was thinking this actually feels like the transition point because you look at Moore's work in the 80s and you look at what came after in the British invasion, the British people who followed Moore. And I feel like this is kind of a commentary on kind of like Grant Morrison coming in and kind of taking that mantle from Alan Moore and Grant Morrison yeah, he did some edgy stuff, but mostly he was much more keyed into the kind of like the hopeful idea of superheroes and just kind of like let's just explore these wacky concepts as opposed to just trying to ground everything in in realism. um and there's something he said here that really kind of, oh yeah, so he said the 80s are long over, time to move on, time to be someone else. um so I really got the sense that, like, even though it is, I feel like the Spider Jerusalem thing was just kind of like Ellis just tossing himself in there for a little bit, but I really feel like this is more about the kind of feud between Alan Moore and Grant Morrison. What do you think about that?
In thinking about that, I do think I do see that because I think it would be. I think if you were to read that, because originally I read that transition as a Spider Johnson reference, and like, hey, look, I'm the future. But thinking about that and the fact that all what he does at the end is the Jack Carter turns around, I think says, "I'm going to go now," and his last words are "being seeing you, be seeing you," which is I think a reference to the prisoner, and just walks off into the darkness. And I think that makes a lot more sense to make him as Morrison, where he's like, "Okay, I'm no longer, I'm no longer Jack Carter, this magician. I am." It's almost like he's going to practice a different activity. But yeah, I think that it makes sense as a transition from the Alan Moore, hot and heavy, very intensive kind of scripting to Grant Morrison kind of being a little bit more, dare I say it, hallucinogenic in his approach,
Hmm.
where it's like you know, every idea is, every idea is true, and let's focus on the really intelligent. Like let's focus there rather than on let's if Alan Moore was a deconstructionalist, Grant Morrison is a reconstructionalist.
I think that's a really good way of putting it. And there are two things you mentioned that really kind of seal this in for me. First, you mentioned the prisoner. There are tons of prisoner references in Grant Morrison's work. Like it's all over The Invisible. So that's one thing. And also, you made the point about him now practicing a different kind of magic because both Alan Moore and Grant Morrison are, are steeped in kind of like magic traditions and all that, but they come from very different schools of magic. Moore is much more kind of like the more old style, like more pomp and circumstance, like all the ceremonial stuff. Whereas Grant Morrison is more into chaos magic. This idea of like, no, these things are just symbols you use to focus your concentration. It doesn't actually matter what the symbols are. So he talks about like, if you ever read some of Grant Morrison's stuff where he talks about this, he talks about like instead of forming a sacred circle invoking the Egyptian gods or something, you do it with the new god. He does it with the new gods instead, and that kind of stuff. So it's like it's just a way to focus your energies in the direction that you want to, just kind of like give you like a way of kind of centering it. So they both come from these very different schools of magic too, and that kind of fits into what you were saying there. He's now going to be practicing a different kind of magic. um we're going to take a quick break, and then we'll come back and we'll continue talking about this series.
Blast off into a new universe with Corsairs, a new sci-fi space opera serial by me, Percival Constantine. In these adventures, join the crew of the Corsair, a group of intergalactic mercenaries as they struggle to survive in the depths of corporate-controlled space. If you're a fan of Firefly, Cowboy Bebop, or Guardians of the Galaxy, then you're going to love Corsairs. Subscribers to my Patreon get 2 new episodes a week, while free members get 1 new episode a week starting in December. Patreon offers new subscribers a 7-day free trial, but I'm also throwing in another perk. If you sign up with the coupon code SCP, you'll get 90% off your first month. So visit patreon.com/Percival Constantine and join in the adventures. We all love superhero movies and TV shows, but what about the comics that inspired them? Marvel, DC, Image, and more have provided the template for the movies and shows we all enjoy watching, and it's important to honor that tradition by buying and reading comic books. Superhero Cinephiles is proud to be an affiliate of mycomicshop.com. It began as a small mail-order business operated by junior high school student Buddy Saunders all the way back in 1960, and has been operating on the internet since 1997. My Comic Shop has new releases, value packs, back issues, trade paperbacks, comic art, regular auctions, and a whole lot more, including 35% discounts on pre-orders. You can also sell your own comics or utilize their consignment services. You can even create your own want list of comics you're searching for. To get started, check out our affiliate link in the show notes or on the superherocinephiles.com homepage.
And we are back, and we are still talking about Planetary. Was there anything else you wanted to say about the issue 7 and kind of the transition from Moore to Morrison or any of that stuff?
Well, I think it's just so. I think it was well. I do now that you've said it. I think I see it more in retrospect. But I think it's good, and I think it's one of Ellis's strengths is that he knows how to make his point without hitting you over the head with it.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
No, yeah, I agree. I think he does a very good job of and that's the thing that makes this different from a lot of Ellis's other work is that there's a subtlety to this that isn't always present in the other stuff he does. But anyway, let's move on from this and talk about some of the other issues in this collection, or some other ones that kind of jumped out at you.
Okay, well, I think the main one, the one that's highlighted in Joss Whedon's introduction, is Magic and Loss, because that's the issue where I went, okay, I know what you're trying to do, and I think it is so dead on.
Okay, yeah, let's talk about that. Obviously, it opens with these two alien creatures. They're about to send their child off into space. Well, the very opening image, right, is just you see a red cape, you see a lantern, you see these two bracelets, and the red cape even has like kind of a almost triangular gold symbol on it. So we're pretty much looking at Superman, Green Lantern, and Wonder Woman here. And this is one of the things where I'm saying, like, this is where, this is one of those issues that really kind of stands out as showing that this is not really set in the Wildstorm universe, despite what everybody says. Because now we're involving all this kind of other secret stuff that nobody had ever heard of before, and it doesn't seem to gel with what we knew of Wildstorm. That aside, let's just focus on what we have here. So one of the things that, stood out a lot to me here was we have Captain Leather. He comes in here and he finds the ship, and you see this alien baby inside, wrapped in the cape, and he just incinerates it right off the bat. So it's like so that's basically there's no Superman here, right? This is gone.
Yeah, and he's on the phone with Randall Dowling, and he says, "What? Wait, what do you mean?" He's like, "Oh, sure, I incinerated him. Oh, well, what do you mean you didn't expect me to do that?" Like, it was kind of like this, almost this, instead of, okay, get rid of the kid, he thought, okay, and I think it shows like how maybe cynical this world is, this particular world is, where it's like the first thing you do when you see an alien baby, not like kidnap it or take it to a lab. If you're evil, like if you're good, you take care of it, or like take it to a lab or find a place to hide it, you burn it.
Yeah. And of course, while he's on the phone with him, he is extracting the lantern from this Green Lantern type character as well. Quite painfully, it looks like, as well. And he's also kind of saying that, oh, this ambassador from this hidden female civilization, we're going to assassinate her from orbit as she emerges through their shield, and then just, tell them to stay the fuck away from us, type of thing. So that's basically like the three of the symbols of hope and justice in the DC universe are just completely eradicated in this universe. And it's also telling because we are looking at kind of analogs to Johnny Storm and Reed Richards here, but they're like twisted 90s image versions of them. So they're obviously, evil bastards instead. And so I feel like this is kind of a meta commentary on two levels. First, it's the obvious, how we have, just like they showed with that superhero in issue 7, being kind of like broken apart and deconstructed, and his origins changed into something completely different. We see Ellis basically doing that with the Fantastic Four in this book. But more than that, too, it can also be seen as kind of a meta commentary on how Marvel kind of with the Fantastic Four kind of usurped the knocked DC off its pedestal that they had at the time. And the Fantastic Four ended up becoming like one of the hottest selling comics of all time, and it ended up surpassing like Superman and Green Lantern and Wonder Woman all that time, especially because this was after DC had tried to reinvent Green Lantern and the Flash. And even still, then Stan Lee and Jack Kirby come along with the Fantastic Four and completely upend everything.
Yeah, and I think, and I know that like Ellis will play with the Fantastic Four imagery throughout the rest of Planetary. So I don't know if I don't remember, he may have made some commentary in an interview. I don't think he's ever said outright like, yes, I use the Fantastic Four because da 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 da. But I think here he's maybe the fact that they're kind of a threat, and that they're kind of he hints that they're kind of a ruling, if not like kind of a secretive, like surveillance type of organization. I do wonder if he's maybe trying to make a deeper point about how certain kinds of storytelling, that maybe the Marvel type of storytelling, which really wasn't, was focused on not just, from the basics, you get a plot summary, you do big images and you let them through, but the idea that there wasn't always that sense of wonder. It was always about more personalities and interpersonal struggle. So I'm wondering if by doing it this way, if he's trying to make that kind of commentary about different storytelling styles. I mean, I could be talking out of my ass for all I know, but I just wonder if that's an element.
No, I think it is, because you see that kind of idea running through this entire series, right? Whether it's the pulp stuff first, and then we move into kind of the golden age of superheroes. We move into the silver age. We touch on the bronze age and the modern age. So he's really kind of, kind of traipsing through these different eras of influences. And also you throw in like the B sci-fi movies and stuff like that were very much an influence on those kind of ideas.
Hmm.
And that's actually a nice way to move into talking about another issue I really liked, which is Cold World. This was the 11th issue, and this is where we meet John Stone, Agent of Storm, uh, which is an acronym, of course. And the funny thing here is they call it at one point they actually call it Storm Watch. And the storm part is an acronym, and they have watch after it. So obviously, this is probably like one of the strongest tie-ins to Wildstorm. We see like, oh, okay, this is kind of the beginning of the Stormwatch organization. They mention Henry Bendix, who was the weatherman, who was in charge of Stormwatch. He gets name dropped a few times here. But this was a fun issue, especially the opening with this kind of like, the super spy Nick Fury, Agent of Shield throwback stuff. What was kind of some of your thoughts about this one?
I mean, I loved it too because I mean, Planetary is one of those series that I don't know if Ellis had like a pre-printed, like a pre-planned like timeline, but you could see where he's thinking, okay, I've got this idea for a story. Let's fit it here because then it'll make sense. So there isn't a lot of, and it has that feel that this isn't just pulling stuff out of thin air and throwing it and seeing if it sticks. Like there's a real kind of logic to it. And I also like how he is able to ape the writing style of those 60s espionage books without feeling like parody. I mean, the only time where it might have, or where it kind of maybe broke tone was when Elijah Snow freezes the bride, and he says, "Hey, you know what? She had a weapon in her hide that could have punched a hole right through you. I knew she was going to steal this, so you was either arrest her or kill her. So we're on the same side, bro."
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is kind of the tipping point into where Elijah starts to recover his memory because, as you had mentioned earlier, one of the through lines through this is the fact that he's got these big holes in his memory. And then it all comes together in the final issue of this collection, issue 12, Memory Cloud, where he reveals he is the mysterious fourth man who is kind of like bankrolling or is like in charge of Planetary. And we find out that there are these planetary guides that have existed, and this is why Elijah Snow was traveling the world for so long, because he was chronicling his adventures in the Planetary guidebooks.
Mm-hmm.
So then this idea of him being the one in charge and who had sacrificed portions of his memory so that he could go into hiding, and this idea of how he had done this to protect his people, and then they had to bring him back, basically. But try and tiptoe around, how much they tell him and how much they let him know. What do you think of this issue?
I thought it was a good issue. I like the fact that it brings everything to a head, and this would have been like probably issue 10, like within the first year. So it didn't waste time in doing the why doesn't Elijah Snow remember, kind of what that. The only question I have is that there's an issue that's inserted that's about the three. It's a flashback, so it's Ambrose Chase, Jakarta Wagner, and the drummer had gone out elsewhere and brought back something that's called an entity from a fictional reality, and it's set out, and I know that there are some big questions, but I was wondering if Ellis had written that. See, I'm trying to make that fit with the ending because it's almost like it was trying to suggest that Elijah Snow was that entity from a fictional reality. But it doesn't make sense because Elijah Snow has a well-documented backstory in this reality. So I'm trying to, I don't know if that was meant to be, I don't know if Ellis had written that as like a red herring, or because I don't remember that entity ever appearing in later issues of the series.
It's been a while since I've read the whole series through, and we'll probably be getting to those other two books eventually. So we'll figure it out
Mm.
as well. Especially because my clearest memory, because I had read the first two books at least twice before I read through the my most recent reread where I finished the whole series. So these first two books especially are much more rooted in my memory than the last two books are.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, I don't have as strong of a memory of the second half of the series and how it ended. Um, but I do remember at the time reading the that page when he reveals that he is the fourth man, and then
Hmm.
the kind of, he freezes the ground in the shape of a giant four so that the four's cameras can see it from space. And I remember thinking at the time, oh, now we're gonna get some shit. And then I didn't read the rest of it until like 10 years more later.
Hmm. Yeah, because I do remember that the second half of the series is basically him heading towards a showdown, but I honestly don't remember, and I'd have to reread the other two volumes.
Mhm.
Um, but I wasn't sure if in that set, if it was meant, if he was trying to provide like a red herring that, oh no, it's not. You think this is Elijah Snow, because that's the issue at the end where it has like the text box. It says like, um, Elijah Snow has never heard of Ambrose Chase. Da 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 da.
Right, yeah, yeah.
So that's probably the only odd one out because I'm not sure. Like everything else kind of fits in as either a random adventure. That one, I'm not quite sure how it fits at this point. But I do think that the last two issues where Elijah Snow realizes who he is and he says, "Hell no, I'm getting back at them."
Hmm.
I think that's the. I think those are the. You know, I was, as much as I appreciated the fact that they ended the volume on that story where he does the big four in ice. There's part of me that wanted to be like, no, I want to read more, but luckily there's two more volumes to read.
Hmm.
But yeah,
You know,
I think
it, oh, sorry, go ahead, finish your thought.
I was about to say, I think that, Ellis did the smart thing, which is okay, we're going to end the obvious mystery at this point. And obviously the book had to be selling well for it to get
Mm.
to a year's worth. So this is kind of like it feels like it's the end of, it feels like the natural end to a volume, but it's great because it's like, okay, there's more that's going to happen.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Also, too, one of the things I think about as I'm rereading this, and it kind of strikes me, is that I feel like this book is actually the most interesting when it's not focused on the main characters. It
Right.
is actually all the air, because when you think about it, like, Elijah, Jaquita, and the drummer, they're not very interesting characters, and there's not a whole lot of differentiation between them. They're just kind of like stock Ellis snarky characters in a lot of ways. But
Mhm.
but it is all the other ideas he plays with. And I feel like them just being kind of like the vehicle through which we go through and we explore these different ideas and these different concepts
Mhm.
of pop culture is actually when the book is far more interesting than when it gets into kind of like the mystery of Elijah Snow and all that kind of stuff.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think too that's um, it kind of reminds me of a series from the '80s, and it's one of my favorite comic series ever. And it's a series called Crossfire, written by Mark Evanier and art by Dan Spiegel. And it's about a bail bondsman in LA who finds this. It's this professional thief's flying suit. Basically, it's a mask with a suit with wings that he glides. Um, and so he decides to help people out. He's kind of like a street level superhero. But the stories often have focus on characters that are peripheral, and like he comes in, and it's a very quiet. The focus is never on Jay Endicott, fighting masked bail bondsmen. It's always about how these people are working through things, and Jay and Crossfire kind of plays a little bit more of a role. And I think Planetary, and I think that's the strength of the show, the series, is that it knows that going on these side trips, you'll learn more about the world. And I think that's the secret to the series is that the lead character is not Elijah Snow, Jakata Wagner, the drummer, or Ambrose Chase. It's about this world,
Hmm.
and they're just the ones who are finding out about it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of like an anthology series in that way. Whereas, and it's kind of like, and there were a lot of TV shows that did this where you would have this kind of like character who was just there as kind of like the vehicle to explore these other types of these other types of stories, right? So, Quantum Leap was a good example of that, right? It was just kind of like a
Mm-hmm.
vehicle to explore these different stories and different time periods and all that. Yeah, there was this backstory with Scott Bakula's character, but I think the real interesting part of that show was more about, seeing these different time periods and seeing how they go through it. You also had shows like, The Incredible Hulk was very similar type of idea to that, Kung Fu. There are a lot of kind of these TV shows where it's like we're just using this title character as a way to kind of explore these worlds. Even like more recently, probably the first two seasons of Supernatural were very much kind of in that vein. We're just using
Mm-hmm.
these guys as kind of the way to show these different types of monsters and kind of build up this world. And then as the series went on, then they started focusing more in on the brothers themselves. But for the most part, in those early seasons, it was just focused on, let's kind of explore the world and let's kind of like drive around and see these different stories and how these different supernatural creatures are affecting these stories.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any other things you wanted to mention about the Fourth Man?
Well, I think that it's a very the conclusion. It's one of those that I'm sure a more cynical reader would have said, "Oh, well, it was there all the time." But I think the fact that it turns out it's the guy who didn't have his memory, and it's clear that he doesn't have all of his memories back, but that he's starting to remember kind of the right memories. I think it makes sense on a multitude of levels because I think they're trying to, in a weird way, Ellis is trying to parallel Planetary with the Four. That if the Four is about burying the sense of wonder and burying all these wonderful things, Planetary is about bringing them back. And it's I think their motto is keeping the world strange, and
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think
I believe
that's
so.
the thing that I think that you know. And I think too, if it's that meta commentary on Marvel versus DC, you could argue that Marvel, despite going cosmic at times and having big ideas, was really kind of small and insular because it focused on interpersonal relationships and kind of more personal drama, whereas DC kind of had these, and a lot of Golden Age comics, to be specific, had a lot of just great crazy ideas that they ran with, and I think having revealing who the Fourth Man is reveals that, okay, here are these two forces at work in this universe, ones that want to engage in the strange and the crazy and the kind of the sense of wonder versus the we got to kill it, we got to stifle it, there's no way we should, we need to keep control of this. And I think that's one of the great things about this book is that it's very much it's very much in the school of thought that says, have a sense of wonder and let's explore. And I think that's why why I love the series so much. It's just that willingness to go, okay, for an issue, here's where we're going. Come along for the ride.
No, absolutely. One final thing I want to talk about is just Cassaday's artwork. Like, fairly recently we had talked about his run on Astonishing X-Men with Josh Whedon, and going back and revisiting that, like just like his artwork is incredible in that, and then here as well. But it's, and I'm not breaking any new ground here. We've talked about this before, but I think one of the things that really always strikes me whenever I reread this is just the covers. The covers are so good, and there's such a great way of capturing the feel of each of the kind of stories that they're diving into here. So you've got for example, issue number 7, that's the Vertigo issue, so it is styled like those Hellblazer covers that oh god, what's his name? I'm blanking on the guy's name, but the very famous, you guys know what I'm talking about, the very famous kind of Hellblazer covers, the kind of like almost like painted style
Would
thing.
be John Tuttlebean?
Not John Totalman. No, it's not him. He also did covers for
Uh,
Punisher.
oh, I know who you're talking about. I just can't think of the guy's name, but I know who you're talking about.
Tim Bradstreet. That was it. Tim
Yes,
Bradstreet.
Tim
Yes.
Bradstreet.
Yeah, it's very much a Tim Bradstreet cover. In fact, I wonder if actually Tim Bradstreet did the cover. It looks so much like his style. I don't think he did. I think it was actually Yeah, it says Cassaday did the cover as well here, and at least according to Comic Find. So yeah, Cassaday did the cover, but he does a great job of capturing the Bradstreet style. And you've got issue 8, which is kind of like, this throwback to like sci-fi thing. So it's got like the it's like an old 1950s sci-fi movie poster. Issue 9, that's all about the Planet Fiction. So that is all dealing with, the cover is, like a manuscript style thing. Issue 10, Magic and Loss. This is an interesting one because it's not it's more of like it's just a cover of a graveyard, and then Planetary is just written in very plain text across the top, and the skies are just kind of gloomy. This is the only one that doesn't really tell you what is happening inside the issue, because it's not like a superhero type cover when this is the issue dealing with the superheroes. Instead, it's more focused on kind of a lost thing. But then issue number 11, Cold World, this is the John Stone one. So this is very much like the old Jim Steranko, Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. covers. Then issue number 12 is also interesting because this is when Memory Cloud, this is when Elijah recovers his memories. And so this is actually the only one that doesn't have the logo at all. And I didn't realize this until I was just looking at it right now, but there's no logo. And instead we just see there are all these pages from Planetary in the background. And then you just have Elijah's kind of like semi-translucent figure in the front. So this is really kind of focusing on the fact that this is about Elijah here. Was there anything you wanted to mention about these covers?
I love the fact that throughout the series, there's never the same cover twice. And I do think, I think the cover to Magic and Loss, I wonder if that's less about revealing the nature of the story or to cement the fact that, yeah, there was definite loss. And it wasn't even, and it's something to be mourned. Because, I mean, in this world, which could have had a Superman-style hero, a Green Lantern-style hero, a Wonder Woman-style hero, or that might have been like the equivalent of their Silver Age, they were all murdered. I mean, literally. One was incinerated, one was, he's not going to survive that autopsy at all, and they even make a point of, we shut him down over the great spot of Jupiter. And one was assassinated. Like, there's a real sense of, it wasn't just, they didn't meet their potential. They died, and the world is a much gloomier place because of those deaths.
Mm-hmm. And also, when you mentioned that there's no two covers are alike, there's also logos too, right? You have the only exception is the first issue and the final issue, issue number 1 and issue number 27. That uses the same style of font and the same kind of like style of logo for Planetary. But even that is a little bit different because in the first issue, you've got the Planetary words are kind of like semi-wrapped around a globe, whereas in the final issue, they are semi-wrapped around, but it's not a globe. Instead, it's just the 3 central characters standing in a circle. Mm-hmm. So even that is they're playing around with it a little bit. But yeah, it's very, I think it's very cool the way that Ellis and Cassaday decided that they were going to not only style the covers after these different style of influences, but even the logo too, right? And I think, one of my favorite examples of that is issue number 5, which is the Doc Savage issue, right? Where they have, where it's very much in the style of the old reprints of the Doc Savage logo, the kind of like wavy type logo.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that story is about their Doc Brass, who is their Savage equivalent, talking about kind of the last. It's basically an adventure of he and his team of heroes, which consisted of your Spider / Shadow XB, your Tarzan XB, your I know there's an Aviator, and I think they just call him the Aviator. There's a super science type called Edison, which was which is probably the most obscure pull because in the late 19th century there were some steampunky science fiction type novels called Edisonades, because I think the kickoff was Thomas Edison Goes to Mars, which, okay, yeah, he probably stole the idea from Nikola Tesla, but still.
like everything else.
Mhm.
But yeah, and yeah, so we had here. I got the page here. There's also kind of like a Fu Manchu type character there as
Right.
well. Um, and also that another thing to mention here is, of course, we did have um, Sherlock Holmes mentioned as someone who had trained. He actually existed in this world, and he had trained Elijah Snow in the art of detection. So there's
Mhm.
that part of it too. So yeah, lots of these different um, references and crossovers to them.
Mhm.
There are other things we wanted to mention about the this book about the Fourth Man.
Hmm. I think that, this is where this could have easily been a jump the shark moment where now that we know who the fourth man is, the rest of the series just doesn't meet up to it. It's just all it becomes boring. It doesn't. I mean, I think this is a great because I think the series only did like 24 to 26 issues. I mean, this is
27
a
total, yeah.
27. So I think this is a good like end to like the first half of the run. Or
Mhm.
okay, we know that the big major mystery has been solved, but now it's okay. The next phase is how do we stop the four?
Well, also something else to mention is the fact that this series took a while to finish, right? It started in
Mhm.
1999, even though it's 27 issues. The final issue didn't come out until December 2009, which was apparently 3 years after issue 26, right? Issue 20, at least according to Comic Mind. If Comic Mind's wrong about this, I'm
Mhm.
sorry, but you had because originally the series was supposed to be bi-monthly, but Warren Ellis got sick. Cassaday had other commitments, so we had here like some pretty big gaps in the series run. Um, it looks like starting in 2004, because 2004 they'd been pretty much by. Oh no, actually, first, yeah, there's nothing in 2002. So from October 2001 to October 2003, issues 15 and 16, there's a gap there. And then from issue 18 to 19, issue 18 was February 2004, and then 19 was May, and then 19 to 20, May to September, 20 to 21, September to December, 22, December to March 2005, and then to August 2005 was 23, then March 2006 for 24, June 2006 for 25, December 2006 for 26, and then issue 27, the final issue, December 2009. So there were a lot of delays on this.
Yeah.
But one of the things that you have to that I think which I mean, I feel for people who are reading this at the time in real time it was being published, but on the other hand, looking back on it now, and I think about, for example, Grant Morrison's new X-Men run, which is one of my favorite runs of all time, but it is very much hampered by the fact that there are all these different artists that come in and are doing fill-ins. And it really kind of disrupts the reading experience when you see that there are some issues where the art was very clearly rushed through because to meet a deadline. Whereas this, it's John Cassaday all the way through, and he's at the top of his game throughout it. So I really like the fact that Wildstorm and then later DC, when they bought Wildstorm, didn't force Ellis to compromise on and bring in fill-in artists for these issues. Instead, it's Cassaday all the way through.
Yeah, and I think that gives it what I think makes it hold up is that there
Mm-hmm.
isn't a like there's no point where it's like, okay, well the two issues done by so and so aren't as good because the art doesn't reflect the script. I think the fact that they were willing to, you know, that Wildstorm and was able to stick this out for so long to let them complete their vision and that reading it, I mean, the last time I did a full reread was about 5 years ago. Doing a full reread now, but reading it back then, I was amazed at how it all hung together despite all the delays. Because you can tell that, again, I feel like Ellis had maybe he had a notebook with all these notes scribbled in, but there's such a consistency in world building and thought in storytelling that you would be um, if this had all come out for in a good 2.5 year run, just based on the quality of the stories, I might assume that Ellis wrote all 27 scripts, handed them to John Cassaday, and said, "You just draw your heart out. We'll get sure these are out on time." But
Mm-hmm.
the fact that it did have a lot of skips in between, one, it made each read unique because they weren't doing, you didn't have a cliffhanger. You had
Right.
story that all led somewhere. And I think the fact that it still hangs together despite all those delays is a real strength of both the story and the art.
Absolutely, yeah. Okay, that's a good point to end on, Gordon. So thanks so much for coming on and really enjoyed rereading this and talking about it with you. And of course, obviously, we'll have you on eventually to talk about books 3 and 4 at some point in the future. But for now, why don't you tell people where they can find you?
Okay, well, you can look me up on Amazon.com. You just type in Gordon Dymowski and I'll take you straight there. My homepage, which contains information about my professional and my writing efforts, is gordon-dymowski.com. I'm also on Patreon. I've started to do a lot more posting, and am going to be featuring a new short story, either unpublished or previously published for paid patrons. So it's patreon.com/Gordon Dymowski. I'm also Gordon Dim on Blue Sky, and I do a lot of engagement there. So you have plenty of ways to find me online.
Awesome. We'll have links to that stuff in the show notes, so please make sure to check it out. As for us, superherocinephiles.com is the website. We're also on Blue Sky at superherocinephiles.com on there. And we are Super Cinema Pod on Instagram and Threads, but Blue Sky is pretty much the best place to get in touch with me. And that does it for now. Thanks so much for listening. We'll talk to you next time. Thanks for listening to the Superhero Cinephiles podcast. Superhero Cinephiles is produced by me, Percival Constantine. The show is created by myself and the late, great Derek Ferguson, our host emeritus. Visit us on the web at superherocinephiles.com to listen to past episodes or find out how you can be a guest yourself. Support the show by visiting our advertiser links or click the Buy Me a Coffee link on the website to make a one-time donation. We are Super Cinema Pod on both Instagram and Blue Sky, so please be sure to follow us. We'd also appreciate if you could rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts and share us with your friends.
Thank you for listening. And as always, good night, good evening. God bless.